So this is the YouTube to accompany my podcast, exploring Leonard Bernstein's Clarinet Sonata. One of the striking features, I think, of this piece is the way that Bernstein develops his own voice whilst also learning from other great composers of the time. As I say in my podcast, this piece is Bernstein's opus number 1, is the first official published piece, and it was written after his first trip to Tanglewood, which is a summer school in the Berkshires in America. There he rubbed shoulders with Aaron Copland, who became a firm friend throughout his life, and he was there upon the invitation of Serge Koussevitzky, who was in charge of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and it was originally it was called the Berkshire Music Center, and eventually became known as Tanglewood. One of the other great composers that was there at the same time was Paul Hindemith, who was escaping the Nazi regime in Europe. He emigrated very soon after the Anschluss and arrived in America in 1940, and it was in 1940 that Bernstein first went to Tanglewood, was invited there as a conductor. Whilst there, he also met the clarinetist David Oppenheim, who to whom the piece is dedicated. Oppenheim was a fine clarinetist of the time and became a really firm friend of Bernstein's. Later went on into film production. So in this piece, the things that are interesting is the counterpoint that Bernstein creates at the very, very beginning, and how that's contrasted with sort of bold moves in octaves. So if you look here, you've got this right from the opening. We have these sort of independent lines creating a counterpoint, very like the way that Hindemith does. Hindemith was more interested in the way that harmony was created in a horizontal sense rather than the more traditional vertical sense of us creating chords stacked up one on top of the other. And indeed, Hindemith particularly was interested in harmony that had lots of fourths in it. And this is something that actually you can also see the influence in this piece. So if you look, so these sort of figures around here, and later in the piece, here in the piano part, which is something, this we've got thirds and fourths mixed up. So we've got the fourth here and the fourth down. So it gives a particular kind of feel and shape. As obviously fourths and fifths are open sounding intervals. They're less they vibrate less than thirds and sixths, and obviously seconds and sevenths, which are the most expressive. So Bernstein's still weaving a lyrical line. He's still very much driven by the melodic shape of a line, undulating up and down, and things shifting on the semitone, which of course is a romantic period thing, and just sort of switching on a dime. And this, you can see that here as we're coming down in the piano writing here. It's all white note harmony to begin with, A, G, F, E, and then it shifts on the D sharp and C sharp. So then we're going up then with the sharps here. And then it shifts again as it comes down, and it keeps undulating in this way. And it's the same in the clarinet part with this slightly ambiguous, the B flat and the B natural, all in the same part. So these lines are all independent. So we have this sort of independent polyphony going on here. And then I say the other striking feature is then this is counterbalanced with these sort of bold figures that are rising, ascending. First, get it here in the piano part in octaves, and this is a feature of this sonata. When we look later in the piece, we can find the octaves happening an awful lot. I mean, it's quite normal for a melodic line in the piano either in the left or the right hand to be placed in octaves to give it more heft and more kind of dynamism. So here in weight, here you can see there's these octaves going on. This is nothing new, but to have them in just sort of straight octaves in a more melodic sense is noteworthy, and something that, as I say, is a feature that is mirrored from Paul Hindemith's Sonata from 1939. So this is the opening. The opening theme is set out, and then we have these. Gradually, it becomes more intense at this point. Actually, on the second page, we add all these octaves in the piano part, as I've just described, and then the intervals in the clarinet part start to get wider, and then indeed we have this large interval here. Again, we're still moving chromatically, so you can see here this line that's moving A, G, G flat, and then these fantastic textures. They're quite simple, but they're sort of related. We have these little clusters of notes here that are overlapped to create this interesting texture, and then this is sort of then developed a little bit further by having them as actual clusters played together to create this sort of chugga 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 accompaniment, while still this very lyrical clarinet melody over the top. We've had all this sort of chromatic writing that's sort of sinewy, but then here we have this sort of simpler, purer lyrical line, which, as I explained in the podcast, I think is sort of it's a foreshadowing of West Side Story. If you think of Maria and some of the big arias in West Side Story, the more heartfelt ones, One Hand, One Heart, we have this kind of intensely beautiful but pure, simple lyricism. But in this case, this is more than 10 years before West Side Story, and Bernstein is giving us sort of interesting textures to counterbalance this wonderful lyricism. So after this chugging, chugga chugga, as I like to call it, accompaniment, we have this rather virtuosic piano part, which continues the chugging in the left hand, and puts it all into one hand, and then shows off Bernstein's virtuosity. We have this melody in two parts. So you've got a melodic line with a counter melody underneath, and you can see the interval here says senza pedale, so you've got nowhere to hide in the piano part, but we have this is an octave and a fifth. So there's a lot of virtuosity here the whole way through. We have 10th here, and then we have again this sort of harmonized octaves as we build intensity, and then yet again showing inventiveness. Bernstein gives us this variation on the chugging bass line, which is sort of moving in a stepward way, and we end up with the melody being harmonized in thirds, but with interesting twists in terms of harmony. See here we have an E flat and E natural. One might call that a false relation if you were looking at Renaissance period music, but it adds this kind of slightly major minor tonality. We're building up again. We have even more of the chugging going on at this point. Again, his staccato with a slightly different texture, and then we have a variation on this, the undulating crossed over accompaniment here at letter F, and it's now in triplets, ti da da di 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 da da. So that creates an interesting variation on that. And then we have a new theme, another subject, with these punctuated chords, cha cha da da di da 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 da, mixing with our triplets. So we've got this sort of combination of sort of quite brittle, bright, perky, and this sort of subterranean slithering down into the depths with this bass line that goes into the bass clef. And this builds up. So when Bernstein's introducing these ideas, he then treats the ideas, the themes, in varying ways. And again, he uses various devices that he would have picked up from having looked at Hindemith's work. So this is a classic case. It just starts here, where we have a canon in 3 parts. This is something that Hindemith did in the last movement of his sonata as well. Exactly the same thing, creating a canon in 3 parts, which creates its own harmony and its own kind of twisting interest using the chromatic writing. So having set all of these different kind of ideas, we have a return of the music. Excuse me. So we have that dovetailing passage that we had before, again with our triplets included, and then we have our sort of jazzy in the left hand of the piano with an octave, harmonised octaves, right hand melodic line. And then here's our recapitulation. Oops. So we don't have the ya-da-da-da, it's kind of hidden in the crossed over quite cleverly, but this is the recapitulation. You can see that opening line that we had in the piano part. The interesting thing here is that because we've had successive speed changes, which goes back to the first one's here at letter B. So originally we were minim equals 88, then at B we were 104, so this is a più mosso. And then again at G, just a little bit faster, on poco più mosso 108. So by now, when we have the recap, we're actually at minim equals 108. Bernstein doesn't give us he doesn't say tempo primo or anything like that. He wants this recapitulation to be at the more energized speed, which is a nice touch. Most of the material is presented in the same kind of way, and then we have a linking passage here with this triplet figure when we've built up all these ya-da-da-da with all of this discordance. We've got A natural and A flat, B and B flat, this kind of figure. This is then uses that downwards descending thing to leave us with a 7th here. This is an E flat with a D flat at the bottom. And all of the energy subsides then here through these triplets. And we're left on a pedal bottom E for the clarinet, and it's concert D. And this beautiful little memory, so it's like a bit of nostalgia here. So we have the wonderful second subject melody that we had. This is the bit that I think is a real looking forwards to West Side Story, Maria or something like that, is played again in these bare octaves, but now really high in the top of the piano. He develops further the triplet idea, and we have this minim triplet, which we've not had before, which extends, that pulls out the expression. And then we have a coda. We're back finally to tempo primo happens here. So all that energy is now dissipating. And we have that very theme that I've just been talking about from here is now played in the slower tempo by the clarinet with the extension, again, where it's as if the energy builds and subsides, and so we have this descent one more time through triplets right down to the bottom, and a sort of coda passage with a very clever use of this opening quaver idea, pass between the lower regions of the piano, then up into the treble range, and then finally we have this very almost like false relation thing where we have the C natural followed by the C sharp, so we finally have this sort of what feels like a minor major ending. So it ends on this sort of bright, almost like Tierce de Picardy, you would call it if you're describing older music, where you have something that's kind of been in the minor going up into a major chord. So that's the first movement.